Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, and I'm here today with Bryant Soullentrop, who runs Elevate and Delegate, which is a firm that will help you source and hire a professional in the Philippines to serve as an executive assistant or customer service or other role to support your firm. Bryant, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's first talk. Let's kind of focus in on executive assistants. We can talk about other roles as well, but a lot of independent consultants who listen to the show may realize that they should be thinking about hiring a executive assistant, kind of virtual assistant, but they just haven't got around to it. Talk to me about some of the tasks that you often see people outsourcing to executive assistants or virtual assistants.
Oh man, there's so many. There's a lot of aspects of business development that are really helpful, that to have outsourced to your virtual assistant. Everything from updating your CRM and keeping it up to date based on, your email inbox and all that kind of stuff. Keeping your calendar organized and making sure that scheduling is going well. Um, yeah, there really are so many different opportunities to delegate, some of those less valuable tasks.
Right. Let's think through it together. Some of the things. So one category would be bookkeeping and invoicing. So you know this might be a slightly higher level skilled individual from the Philippines, but you could have someone prepare invoices on your behalf for your clients, right? And even and send them out.
Oh, absolutely. We've hired many bookkeepers for folks. Absolutely. It's a great use case.
Yeah. So bookkeeping and invoicing would be one area. Another area might be you could give the person your login for your LinkedIn and have the person send out LinkedIn connection requests on your behalf to either kind of potential clients or potential partners or whoever you're trying to build your network with. They could search for people that are the fit your criteria and then send those customized LinkedIn connection requests on your behalf.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that every day. One of the things one of my virtual assistants does is she connects with 50 people that are relevant to me and my network. And I mean, I've added 1,000 LinkedIn connections over the last year just by doing
Yeah,
that. It's been really useful.
that's pretty good. Now, 50 is an interesting number. That's what I've heard kind of whispered, although there's no published limit on. That's a kind of a number to stay within that or below that, not to exceed that by too much. Because if you send out too many of those, you can get marked as a spammer. But if you stay within 50 per day, and if you have like a decent acceptance rate, then then LinkedIn is okay with you. What do you include in your connection request?
I generally don't include much. I generally just send the requests. But if they do, accept, I want a list of those people. And honestly, a lot of the people I'm reaching out to are, I come home from a networking event or something like that, and there's 50 business cards or whatever. Those people need to be reached out to, right? They already know who I am. Or if they're connected with me, like on another social media platform, like Twitter is something I use a lot. If they already follow me there, they're kind of expecting to hear from me. Um, but I try not to be too pitchy on my first LinkedIn request. If it's somebody that doesn't really know me so much, I try to really genuinely just say hello, and maybe not even talk about what I do necessarily.
Interesting. Okay. So, business development, you could also, I mean, I suppose some people will use executive assistant or virtual assistant for doing some research or some of the more rote aspects of running their firm.
Yeah, business development, kind of like you were saying before, and then just you can pull a list of 1,000 people that are relevant to you. I work with a lot of people in real estate, and they might say, there's 1,000 brokers I'd like to talk to, but it's kind of hard for me to sit here and customize 1,000 emails, right? And so, your virtual assistant can kind of, make those lists and help maybe write some write some customized emails, maybe do a little research for you. Um, I like to create like a little Excel spreadsheet and say, these are 5 questions I'd like to know the answer to for every individual. And then when I go and write emails, if it's a cold email out to somebody that is a valuable connection, I know a few things about them that I think are going to be helpful, right? And help me stand out.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just jump to some of the actual recruiting piece. So, first thing that a lot of people might be interested to hear is if they hire someone full time in the Philippines, what's the typical monthly salary for that person? Just I know it ranges, but what's the sort of range from to typically that you've of the types of folks that you're seeing people hire?
Yeah, I would say $600 to $1,200 a month for full-time work is pretty typical. I like to go more towards the higher end of that range because we get higher quality candidates, right? And it depends on where they are, cost of living changes and things like that. But yeah, kind of in that range of, $800 to $1,200 is a pretty healthy range if you're going to the Philippines.
Okay, so at the high end, $1,200 a month divided by roughly 120 hours, that'd be around $10 an hour. What's the sort of typical background, educational background, work background of someone in the Philippines who's earning $10 an hour? What would you be able to expect?
Um, Sorry, if it's $800, if it's $600 a month, or $800 a month, or even 1,200 bucks a month, that should still be, it's whatever, $7 an hour, $10 an hour. You're gonna get a pretty competent person. I would say the wages, the wages that you pay them, you're probably gonna multiply those by 3 or 4, and that's probably a comparable Western wage. So, like, if, for example, you're paying somebody out there, um, 1,000 bucks a month, $12,000 a year, I would expect that person in the U.S. to be about a, $55,000 a year person, right? So pretty quality. I mean, you're probably getting somebody pretty talented at that point. Um, and then, you can go up from there, right? There's
Oh,
plenty more, more talent.
okay. So, I mean, so that's a useful benchmark of a 4x, wage arbitrage, which is obviously pretty favorable. Um, and so for someone at that level who's like $10 an hour in the Philippines, what's their typical educational background? They have a college degree. They have 5 to 10 years of work experience. Like they have been working as a manager or in a Philippine company, or they have 10 years of executive assistant experience for U.S. based person. Like what's the sort of typical background at that pay level?
Sure. What we typically see is everyone we recruit is college educated or shortly finishing college. If they're kind of more of like a newer hire. But a lot of what we recruit for is 10 years experience working for an American firm already. So lots of companies have been getting help from the Philippines for 30 plus years. JP Morgan, Verizon, companies, they've been, we can get people that have been working for a company like that for 10 years, and they integrate really well into a US based business. They're used to it.
Yeah. What about work hours? So, will people be working daylight hours in the Philippines, or are people willing and open to work on a U.S. Schedule?
Yeah, they're more than happy to work on a US schedule. That just needs to be communicated in the job posting and things like that.
Okay. Um, let's talk about the service that your firm offers. So, I think you have like a nice fixed fee kind of recruiting fee scheme. Tell us a little bit about your fees and what's the service that you offer.
So the service we offer is basically to take you A to Z from not knowing much about virtual assistants to having one integrated in your business and some coaching after the fact. So, we do kind of a discovery call, figure out what your pain points are, what your real needs are. And then we would schedule an additional call where we would go through the job description. I would work with you to figure out what things we're really looking for as far as the meat and potatoes of what they will actually be doing. And then we kick that out into our recruiting process, and we have a ton of ways that we find applicants. We usually, kind of bring that down from about 60 to 80 applicants for a role down to 20 or 30, and then down to a final three where we would do a final interview with you guys. So we would bring in whoever the client is at that point. We would bring them back in and help us interview. Do that last final interview for those three candidates, and then choose one that they really love. Um, and then after that, we're helping, with the onboarding, explaining some questions. There's always questions. And then we schedule 4 meetings, usually either weekly or monthly, where we would go through and really just assist, because there's always ways to improve your processes with your VA, and so we're there for that. And so the whole package is just $2,500 one-time fee.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what would you say are your tips for somebody who's thinking about hiring a a professional from the Philippines, in terms of, sometimes it probably hasn't gone well, sometimes it goes really well. What would you say are some of the things to avoid doing, or some of the things that really can make the relationship successful?
Yeah, so I would say I have a few tips. First one is do some vetting, like cognitive tests, personality tests, English proficiency tests. Those are really helpful. So you really can get a good grip of, their like grasp of the English language. The next tip I would have is make sure that they have a setup for their kind of more critical infrastructure, that they can always do the job. So, the Philippines is on the ring of fire, right? There's typhoons, there's earth, volcanoes. Once a year, usually there's one of the volcanoes is having some issues. So you want to make sure that your virtual assistant is located in an area that's not too prone to natural disasters. But in the case that they do have a power outage, you're going to want to make sure that they have like a backup generator as well as a backup internet connection, or at least a plan to go somewhere where they would have a backup internet connection. So those are things that people don't think about, and maybe you might go 6 months down the line, and then they could lose power and not be back for a few weeks if you do it the wrong way, right? And that can be really hectic.
You mentioned
The
about.
last thing,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say, the last thing I would say is that every applicant is going to say that they're an amazing fit for the job. Even if they think they would hate that job, they will say that they're an amazing fit and that they want the job because it's a good opportunity for them, right? So if you do if you did this process on your own, you want to make sure you say no to a ton of the applicants, because it's what's important is a long-term good fit for you. And a lot of times, if you just say yes to the first person, we don't see that.
Okay. You mentioned doing English proficiency test. Is that just, you're thinking just a phone call, or is there an actual kind of online test or some kind of thing you could go send someone to do that test? Like you pay $5 or
Yeah,
something, and
there's an online one, and there's a bunch of different online ones, stuff like that.
is there one you recommend?
And there's not one in particular. We've rotated between a few, so I'll try and get one to you that you could put in the show notes that that we prefer. But the other thing that we do a lot of is video calls and phone calls and email conversations,
Sure.
and those are good ways to pick things up. You also want them to do a voice recording, so if they're submitting their application, make sure they do a voice recording if you expect to talk to them on the phone for, have that voice recording be longer than 30 seconds. You want it to be maybe 4 or 5 minutes to really get a good grip on their English language.
You're saying doing that as a screening tool so you could listen to a voice recording before you decide to allocate 20 or 30 minutes to a Zoom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned make sure that they're not in a part of the Philippines that's subject to volcanoes or tornadoes. As a naive person not familiar with the geography there, I'm not sure if I would be qualified to to look up their address and figure out if they're in the red zone or not. Is there a tool that you'd recommend for that, or how would you know?
Rule of thumb is the more rural they are, the less the less the effectiveness of their infrastructure. So if they're in Manila, if they're in a major city, the you might have to pay a little bit more because cost of living, but their infrastructure is going to be better. And in the case that there is a storm or something like that, they will get it back first, right? So
Yeah. What have you seen in terms of how people actually kind of mechanically send the funds? How do you actually pay people? You pay people via like a wise.com or PayPal or Venmo or what's sort of the most preferred method?
yeah, we like Wise.com. It's the fastest. It has the least amount of fees. I mean, every payment platform has its own little quirks, but Wise.com is what we recommend to all of our clients.
Okay. And listeners, we have a previous episode where I talked about using wise.com. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. Okay. So beyond executive assistants, what are some of the other roles that you see people, that you've helped people hire?
Sure, customer service representatives. Some people need to do cold calling for different reasons. Bookkeeping, kind of like we discussed before, that's a really good one. I've even seen people, hire like a light operations manager. That's been possible. When I think of consultants and people that, are more like solopreneurs or have very small teams, there are a million things that you'd probably like to do more of. Social media, right? That's a big one. So actually helping you, think of some content ideas, right? You could shoot a video, but like your VA could also send you, hey, here's 20 ideas of something you could do videos on, right? And then you're sharing it to LinkedIn, and we all want to do more social media. We all want to do more content, but it's a treadmill. It's a lot of work. So VA can be super helpful with social media.
Now, have you seen people hire someone who is really, on the social media theme, who is really capable at, let's say, making micro content out of something that you did, let's say this episode itself? If I wanted to make some audiograms or short little, video snippets or something, or some quote images to post, are there people who have a lot of skill set around that?
Oh yeah, all day. That's a great use case for sure.
Okay. Um, what about any other roles that you've seen people hire?
We have someone that does copywriting for us, so they actually write blog posts. She works full time, and it's kind of like in that social media sphere, but they're a little more long form. That's really good. Um, we've had if you do a lot of recruiting, or if you have to like get in contact with a lot of vendors for any reason, say you're putting together, maybe you know, you got to put together an event, and you need to reach out via email to 20 different vendors for 5 different categories. That's incredibly time consuming. So just kind of vendor outreach is a great one. Um, so I'm trying to think of maybe some other helpful ones, but the opportunities really are pretty endless.
How do people typically think about just confidentiality and protecting their IP? If you live in the U.S., you hire someone in the U.S., you feel pretty comfortable about kind of the U.S. legal system. But if someone's in the Philippines, it's I can't imagine going and try to like go after someone in the Philippines. So, talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a few things there. One is in the Philippines, they're pretty strict about, property theft is a pretty big deal there in the Philippines, and especially digital property theft, like IP property theft, is pretty, it's a big deal there, right? Um, One of the main reasons we like to go to the Philippines is because it is just culturally a lot more trustworthy than some other countries, right? Some other places where people traditionally have done more outsourcing, right? Um, so the integrity of the folks that work on our team is incredibly high, and the hires we've made, we really don't see issues with that. Um, Obviously, any kind of, every once in a while you can, have somebody that is a bad actor, but I would say most of the time, you're making all of the same precautions that you would in the U.S. With a U.S. based hire. You just want to make sure that you're mitigating all risk and things like that. You mitigate as much risk as you can.
Okay, fantastic. So tell us about where we can find more about your firm online. What URL would you point us to?
Yeah, elevateanddelegate.com. That is a great place to reach us. That's our website. It just has a contact form there. The other great place to find me is on Twitter. And so that's Bryant Soullentrop on Twitter. I've spent too much time on there, so feel free to send me a message.
Fantastic. We will include those links and your Twitter in the show notes. Bryant, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.